So today I was meditating on 1 Samuel 8, verse 9 to 18. This is when they had gone to Samuel, demanded a king. God had acquiesced, told Samuel, it is not you they're rejecting, it's me. Go ahead, give them their king. But these are the things they will suffer from that king. So I'm going to list all of them. It's a total of 9 things that God told Samuel to tell them, that this is what the king comes with. This is what demanding for a monarchy comes with. I don't know if the people realized they were transitioning from a theocracy to a monarchy. I don't know if they understood the implications that go along with that. It doesn't seem like they did. But let's go over the list, because this list should have been enough to have them turn back and say, no, God, we just want you as our king. But no, this is the list. So this is God talking to Samuel. Now, listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. Verse 10. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, this is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. 1. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. 2. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s. 3. And others will plow his ground and reap his harvest. 4. And still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. 5. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. 6. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. 7. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. 8. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. And 9. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. And that's the word of the Lord. So I started to meditate on this one by one, and the very first one caught my attention. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. He'll take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. This calls to mind another verse that says, some trust in horses, others trust in chariots, but I will trust in the name of the Lord. Let me find it. It's found in Psalm 20, 7-8, and it says, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember and trust in the name of the Lord our God. They have bowed down and fallen, but we have risen and stood upright. But I started to run around with this thing about chariots and horses. So I was looking at the historical context and the cultural context of chariots and horses. Of course, we don't live in days where we battle with chariots and horses, but back in the day, that's what they did. So went back into the history books to look at it, and it says chariots were a symbol of military strength and technological advancements in ancient warfare. They were used for speed, mobility, and intimidation on the battlefield. The inclusion of horses and chariots indicated a shift in Israel's military strategy, moving away from reliance on God, as they had done in their previous battles, to reliance on human military strength. Worse yet, this was in direct contradiction to the instructions God had given them in Deuteronomy 17, verse 16, which reads, the king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. Remember, their land of captivity, they had horses and chariots. God had taken them out. They were supposed to just be led by God. God was giving them strategies for every battle. And now here they were going to, instead of relying on God to give them direction, now they're going to begin to rely on their own military might. But it was coming at a cost. This is what the king was going to do to them to achieve that status. So running in front of chariots, the act of running in front of chariots was a position of subservience and prestige, but also danger. Kings would use men to run in front of their chariots as an honor guard, signaling the king's approach. This role was symbolic of the king's power and authority. Serving in such a role could also be perilous in warfare, as these men were exposed and vulnerable. In fact, when we fast forward to 2 Samuel, we find Solomon having 50 men run in front of his chariot as a display of his splendor. His royal splendor, to be exact. So here we see God is warning the Israelites that the king will claim their children for his purposes and not for their own good necessarily, but just for the glory of the king himself, which by extension represents a loss of personal autonomy, as their children would now be conscripted to the king's service, but the people still didn't care. They wanted a king. This is how we can vote against our own interests. So running before chariots may have been a visible display of the king's power and authority, but it also reflected the burden of serving under an earthly ruler. The glory of the king would come, but at the expense of the people. So let's look. As I was journaling this, the Holy Spirit began to reveal to me some of the spiritual implications of such an act. And the first point I saw is that Israel's demand for a king revealed their lack of trust in God to lead them. By seeking a king, like the other nations, they were choosing human power over divine guidance. Imagine thinking man can do it better than God. And yet how many times do we fall into this very fallacy? God's warning through Samuel shows that earthly rulers, no matter how noble, will impose burdens on their people. Unlike God, who serves and loves his people sacrificially, human leaders often prioritize their own interests. And we have seen this time and time again. We are seeing this unfolding, and we will continue to see this. The description of kingship in this passage contrasts with God's desire for a people who serve him freely, not under compulsion. So just as Israel sought security in a human king, people today may place undue trust in political leaders, systems, or worldly power. Earthly leadership often comes at a cost to the people, highlighting the need to seek leaders who reflect God's character of humility and service. Again, by their fruit you shall know them. You're not a Christian because you say you are. Your fruit is what shows that you're a Christian. Your actions is what shows that you're a Christian. If your fruit stinks, there you go. If your fruit is good, there you go. We are called to be fruit inspectors. That's all. We're not necessarily called to judge, but we are certainly called to exercise discernment and to inspect fruit, because that's how we know who to follow. That's how we know who to elect into office. That's how we know who to choose as our leaders. Fruit, people, fruit. Bye.